this demo, we'll talk about the initial deployment steps for configuring the Aparavi platform. We'll go through an architectural overview before jumping into the actual component installation steps. We'll also talk about the initial configuration procedure needed to get that scan started. The first important step is to understand the Aparavi architecture. There's two different layers within the Aparavi platform. You have the presentation layer on the left, which is the Aparavi portal in which you have an account and you'll log in and be able to deploy all of these components that are on the data layer to the right. The data layer to the right has two different examples here between the client corporate site and the client remote site. For a larger corporate site, you'll want to deploy a distributed architecture where you have an aggregator server and then one or more collector servers under that aggregator server. The collector server's purpose is to connect directly to the data sources and retrieve data from those SMB and file shares. And it will send those indexes up to the aggregator server to house all of the index data. The aggregator server is actually the point of contact for the platform itself. The bottom example is a collapsed version of the above, where the aggregator and collector server is a single VM or server that serves as both roles. So this server will actually collect data from the data sources as well as store everything within a local database and all the indexes. It will also be the point of connection to the Aparavi platform. Now let's take a look at the infrastructure requirements to deploy either an aggregator or an aggregator collector within your environment. To begin, we'll need a virtual machine or a server with the Windows Server or Linux Server operating system pre-installed. This machine will also need to have a minimum of 4 cores and 16 gigs of RAM, with 8 cores and 32 gigs of RAM being recommended. You'll also need at least 300 gigs of available disk space, but the actual requirement here will depend on the source data. Now that we understand the Aparavi architecture, let's jump into our virtual machine or server and begin the component installation step. The first thing we'll need to do is download and install MySQL Server onto this machine. You can find help by going to support.aparavi.com and selecting the MySQL install article. This will have a direct link to the MSI for installation. I've downloaded this ahead of time so we can begin the MySQL installation step. First, let's launch the MySQL Server installation. Now let's choose a setup type. We'll want to choose full and click next to proceed. We'll go ahead and click next here as well and click yes. Then go ahead and click execute to begin the installation. After a few minutes, the installation will complete. We'll go ahead and click next to proceed. You will need to also click next to begin to configure MySQL Server. You'll be able to choose the server configuration type. In this instance, we'll choose server computer and click next to proceed. We also recommend using the legacy authentication method, so select that and click next to proceed. Here, you'll provide a password for the MySQL root account. Once you've provided a sufficient password for the MySQL root account, you can create an additional user or go ahead and just proceed with the root user by clicking next to continue. We'll leave everything here as default and then go ahead and click next and execute to apply the configuration. Once the configuration has been applied, go ahead and click finish and click cancel and yes to exit the installation. Now that we have MySQL installed on this VM, we'll go ahead and proceed with the component installation step. For component installation, we'll need to begin by logging in to the Aparavi portal. Once you're logged in and you have access to your account, you can either right-click on your client or left-click on the 3 dots and select Add Object. And then, for this demonstration, we'll deploy an aggregator collector, so we'll select that. This will open up the aggregator collector modal, where we can give the aggregator collector a name, choose the platform, choose where it's going to connect to, and then provide the installer with the DB user and password. Once you've filled in all required fields here, we'll go ahead and click OK, which will initiate the installer download. Once the installer has finished downloading, we'll go ahead and execute the installer. As you can see here, the installer is a self-executing package, so once you launch it, it will begin the entire installation process from beginning to end. No additional input from you will be required. A minute or two after the installer has finished installing, you'll notice that the aggregator collector comes online and you can view the status. Now that our aggregator collector is online, let's take a look at the initial configuration. We'll begin by selecting Policies in the top menu bar. You'll then be able to uncheck Inherited and be able to provide an include path to your target data source. If this data source happens to be an SMB share and requires additional credentials to access, you'll also be able to provide credentials to access that data source. You can finalize your configuration by selecting your different classification policies you're interested in having automatically executed against your dataset. You can do so by unchecking Inherit from Aparavi and clicking Add Predefined or Add Custom Classifications and build your own custom classifications. For the purposes of this demonstration, we'll choose from some of the predefined classification policies. Go ahead and click Save All Changes once you've made all the necessary configurations for your initial scan. Once your desired configuration has been selected, you can choose Dashboard and check the Status tab under Dashboard to monitor the status of your initial scan progress. You can of course expand this and take a look at the individual steps that are occurring to scan through and index all of your unstructured datasets. In this initial deployment demo, we learned how easy it was to configure and download the necessary components. We also learned how to quickly install these components and all necessary prerequisites. And last but not least, we also learned how to easily configure the new components to be able to access your data sources. If you'd like to learn more or to get started with Aparavi, go to get.aparavi.com.